My twin sister and I, Stefanie, we both grew up with our parents who were recovering addicts. They were using until we were about 4. Then they went to treatment, they got help. And from that point on, from the time we were about 4 years old, they were very much involved in the 12-step fellowships. So we were sort of sheltered, so to speak, from drugs and alcohol. And the messaging was very clear to us, the dangers of drugs and alcohol. And so we really, we didn't have any issues with that, like in our early teens. My sister started to experiment maybe in her senior year of high school, but otherwise, we were very sheltered from that.
Christina's twin sister, Stefanie, we lost in 2019 due to fentanyl poisoning, but lost my wife, Robin, after 17 years of recovery in 2001. Circumstances were somewhat different, but opioids was the pathway to her homicide. There was a therapist that had given her, after going into a hospital and having surgery, she was prescribed legitimately pain medicine, which she rapidly became addicted to, and decided to go to a detox facility outside the U.S. We were separated at the time because of her addiction to pills. I couldn't be around it. And the therapist came back to the States asking her for help. And could she rent him a room for a couple of months, which she did. And he decided that he was going to treat her himself with a psychedelic. And the psychedelic that he gave her was ecstasy, which was laced with ephedrine. And she ended up overdosing, having a massive stroke. And we had to take her off life support 3 days after that happened. That was December 28th, 2001, 2 days prior to my twins' birthday. They were born December 30th, 1979. And once we lost my wife, Robin, one twin, Christina, was in college in Tampa. Stefanie was living with me. I encouraged Stefanie to go back to Tampa with her sister, that it would be a much better atmosphere for her because she was in the beginning stages of using. And I could see what the roadmap was ahead of us as she continued to stay with the people she was with in the areas that she refused to go. And she just went on a spiraling, out of control, in and out of jails for the next 18 years.
When we were seniors in high school, my sister met a guy, and she was always very insecure. She was not shy to say that, and she was very closed off. We would always say, like, we were the opposites. I was very social and had a lot of friends, and she had a lot of friends, but it was a different type of friendship, I guess you could say. She wasn't like, you had to really get to know her and earn her trust. And then when you earned her trust, she was the best friend you could ever have. There was no limits to what she would do for you, which was also a problem, which is also how we were raised. We were raised extremely to be very generous, compassionate. And so when my sister got into this relationship in her senior year of high school, he was a very well-known drug dealer, and he kind of swept her off of her feet. And that started with smoking marijuana, and very soon after that led to cocaine. And that kind of started her experimentation. It didn't get like extremely bad, I guess you could say, for several years. It took a while for her to get to where she, was using every day and things like that, and dependent on those drugs. But it was a long journey. but it felt like it was quick, though, at the same time. She started with smoking marijuana. And over time, like I said, that led into using cocaine when she would go out and party. And it really didn't become, I guess, no, even at the time, it took years, a couple of years, because she always held a job. She was a very hard worker. But I think there was things that would happen during her using that would be traumatic. And the guilt and the shame started to pile up. And, she had bad relationships with myself, my parents. And as those things the events started to compound, I think the use became more. Eventually, she lost her job. And the more that she lost, the deeper her experimentation became. And then once she started using drugs that made you physically dependent, because cocaine doesn't make you physically dependent. It's more of a psychological drug. When she became physically dependent on pain medications, which were prescribed after a car accident, that kind of opened the floodgates in her brain. And she used to say, I feel normal. I've never felt so normal. And that, I think, is a really big key because, in my opinion, there's so many different multiple pathways. How do you get to an active addiction? But for her and us being born, genetically, to our parents, both being addicts, your risk level of becoming an addict is that much greater.
She was homeless for a considerable amount of time. We live in an area called Davie, Florida, which is sort of a Western community. And she would sleep under a bridge that I would go over, and Chrissy would go over every day, knowing that she was there and there was nothing we could do. We tried everything, We tried loving her. We tried, tough love. We tried more drug treatment facilities, tried meetings, and she just was not ready. She ended up being taken in by this guy who human trafficked her. And he would turn her out, and whether it was going into clothing stores and stealing clothes and then having to resell them, going into a local supermarket, stealing meat and selling it, or, of course, prostituting. She was physically abused. And even under those situations, there was nothing that we could do or offer her that she was ready and willing to change.
The last time that she got clean prior to her death in September of 2019, she was living under a bridge right by our house, right where we grew up in Davie. And there's been so many people who have passed away under that bridge. And I would always go to her and, are you ready? Are you ready? I worked in treatment, so I could easily get her into treatment. And she'd say, yeah, I just gotta get high one last time, which I understood that. She didn't want to go into treatment sick, and I understand. So that particular time, there was, she had her supply, but she needed a needle. And literally everyone under that bridge was sharing the same needle. So I know this is going to sound crazy to everybody, and that's okay. But I took her and she went to get her needle. And after that, she decided she didn't want to go into treatment. However, it was a couple days after she did go into treatment, and she was clean all the way until 4 days before she ended up overdosing on fentanyl and dying. It was really bad. In the end, right before she got clean, she was living in the street. For many years, we tried to, I guess, minimize the harm, of her consequences, which can go either way. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. Everyone talks about the rock bottom. And my sister would always say, rock bottom is already passed. Everyone talks about, they have to get to rock bottom. and she would say the rock bottom came and went, but we really tried to protect her from a lot of consequences. Probably wasn't the best idea, but as family members, you do the best that you can with what you know. And at the end, she was definitely being traded for drugs, sex for drugs, and being beat up. She was stealing from people, family included. And she was just a different person. The moral compass was out the door. She would do anything to feed her addiction and not be sick and not feel all of the things that she was feeling.
Interestingly enough, in 2019, in September, Stefanie was with my present wife, Karen, and I, and we were going away on a cruise, and Stefanie was going to go into a halfway house, a recovery community for women, which in previous years she had done very well in that environment. And that was always her goal, was to one day have a facility for women and children. That's all that she talked about. So we Karen and I had a planned vacation. We went on a cruise. I had put a tracker on her car when I left. I don't know what was going on. I just felt like something wasn't right, although she seemed fine. She didn't seem to be using. But I just had this gnawing feeling. And it was really the first time I remember being separated from her for a week. And about 4 days into the trip, I'm looking at the tracker on the car, and I'm seeing she's in areas that there's no way that she should be there unless she's using. And I tried calling Chrissy, and I said, listen, something's not right. Chrissy didn't really know what was going on. And so finally, one night, it was September the 12th, late at night, Stefanie sent me a text, and I didn't get it until the next morning, and basically said that I can't go on anymore, Dad. I don't want to live anymore. And I missed that text. I didn't get it, and I feel to this day, obviously responsible, guilty about it. Chrissy says, whether it was then or, a week from then, but I just felt that I could have at least diverted her attention, at least until I got home, but that wasn't to be. When I saw the text, I started frantically calling Stefanie. I was frantically calling Chrissy. And then finally, Chrissy picked up the phone. I said, Chrissy, what is going on?
I remember my dad called me on video message on WhatsApp because he was on a cruise ship. And he said to me, is she alive? Is she dead? And I didn't even know because obviously I hadn't got to the hotel yet. And I said, she's dead.
So she was found in a hotel bathroom floor. And what's distressing to me is that Chrissy went over there, and the detective who was in charge of that case said, Chrissy asked the detective, listen, we have a tracker on the car. We can figure out where she was and who she bought the drugs from. We have an address. We can, So the detective's response to her is, ma'am, with all due respect, your sister was a junkie for the last 18 years. We know her, okay? There was nothing you or anyone could do. What do you want us to investigate? That comment, and then Chrissy and I saying to each other, we have to do something, is what set us in motion with our foundation today and the work that we do.
When she died. Because granted, we had lost our mom to this disease in 2001. And my sister gave us a very hard time, throughout the years of when she was using. But that was my soulmate. And that's why we do what we do now with our foundation, because the pain, it's awful, and it's multi-generational. It's her children are impacted, my children have been impacted. So we just try to use our pain for purpose and try to help other people and prevent more loss.
I'd written to the chief of, there was an interim chief of police, followed up with detectives. We just kept on couldn't get a meeting, couldn't get a face-to-face meeting, just totally disinterested. We live in Broward County, Florida, which is South Florida. And we are blessed with having a police department that gets it. I mean, really understands it. And their officers are trained what to do in case of an overdose. They have peer counselors ready to integrate themselves into whatever the situation is. And I went to them and I explained to them my frustration, because the police department was another local police department. Even though it was in Broward County, it was not part of the Broward Sheriff's Office, and asked him to look into it. And about a week later, he says, Chris, they're not going to do anything. There's nothing I can do. They're not part of our department. I'm sorry, there's just nothing, we can do. And that was from a guy who was a very dear friend of ours within the Broward Sheriff's Office. So that really irked me. Pretty much on a nationwide basis, there's a lot of this addicts or junkies. They don't look like people like me, okay? And I was just as bad as my daughter, Stefanie, with the exception of being trafficked, homeless, and, lived in an addiction that was just running my life and my wife Robin's life too. And until we were ready to get help, nothing was going to change. But back to after losing Stefanie, it really did put us into action. We had this foundation that was named after Robin, the Robin Foundation. And we started that 2 or 3 years after Robin had passed. And I knew nothing about not-for-profits. I knew nothing about foundations. So I thought I had to do it all. I had to finance it. I had to do the events. I thought I had to pay for people's treatment. So needless to say, although the foundation was alive, there was nothing happening. And then when 2007, 2008, with the country in a depression for all intents and purposes, there was no fundraising. So the foundation just sat there. Once in a while, we would get a call. But this really put us, when Stefanie died, into a whole different gear. And we became certified distributors of Narcan and trainers. Up to this point, we have provided free training to any organization that wants it. Last year, we gave out over 10,000 Narcan sprays. We hope to double that this year. But that's all because of Stefanie and Robin. If we didn't experience those losses, we probably would still be sitting on the sidelines.
Initially, we started it because my sister's dream always was to start a halfway house where women and children could go together, because she had done that previously in an episode of recovery. And she loved it. And it was great because her and her son could keep that bond, and she was able to get the help that she needed and not have that separation. So she's always wanted to do the same thing for other people. And down here, there's only one place that's like that. So that was always her dream. So when we started the Robin Foundation, that was our goal. That has always been our goal, to provide housing for women and children while moms are getting clean. However, now with the opioid overdose, really we call it, the overdose epidemic, it's like really, kind of halted our plans because there's so many people dying left and right. So we go and we educate people on overdose, what do overdoses look like, how can you prevent overdoses, harm reduction initiatives, and we distribute Narcan. And we just try to, just educate people as much as we can and help save lives by giving them this life-saving medication.
We serve on all these different committees, but this has got to be like a three-prong approach. And if we don't start passing laws federally, okay, and starting kids out like in middle school, because that's where drugs are now appearing. And now you're hearing that the ages of kids that are overdosing are getting younger, okay? That scares me. So unless there's very, very strict laws, federal and state, that's not going to change. So that's education. Then you have to have treatment. You got to be able to do something with that person. You just can't turn them back out. And there's all different ways, as Chrissy says, through harm reduction. That has a lot of different, and of course, law enforcement. They have to be willing to go out, make arrests, and with strict laws, keep these people away. It's 4 o'clock this morning. I'm up thinking about this interview. And I'm saying to myself, this is probably the worst epidemic that this country has seen, okay? It certainly, I think, far outweighs COVID, and this is not just going to go away. The CDC is saying that for the next several years, that it's going to increase by 20 to 30%. So, we don't want families going through what we have been through.
Addiction doesn't discriminate. We were raised in an amazing household. We had our share of dysfunction. A lot of times people will ask me, well, I don't understand. Like, how come you're not an addict? And I say, I am an addict, just not of substances. My addiction reveals itself in other dysfunctional ways. Perfectionism, maybe enough bad choices, However, I also never did coke and I never did dope, as my sister would say. She always told me, don't do coke and don't do dope. There's no coming back. And so I did dibble and dabble in drugs when I was in college. But my sister always told me, and I always listened, don't do coke and don't do dope. And so that really spared me. And the other thing is that I respect my mental health enough to always, having been in therapy a very large part of my life and treating my depression and anxiety, that definitely has saved me. We have a saying in our family, we say, to be loved by a Cavallo is like no other love. And it really comes from the way our parents were. We watched our parents when they were in recovery. They would bring people in from halfway houses. Like if they didn't have someone to do their pass with or go on a pass with, we would always have for Thanksgiving, Christmas, we would have, in essence, really random, people that were staying in local halfway houses. My parents always, they were the first ones to bring in an NA meeting to Everglades Correctional Institute, which was a maximum security. So the way we were raised, it was we loved everybody. And my sister and I definitely at times, I still work on it, loved to a fault, and have, always have to work on boundaries. But my sister was the most loyal, loving, badass. I don't know how else to say it. My sister was. And if she loved you, she was going to go to the ends of the earth for you, and people knew that. I know as a family, we were shamed so much by so many people, even by my colleagues, because I've worked in the treatment industry for a long time. They would say, about being codependent. And I would say to that, it's we are shaming so many people, family members, who were all doing our very best. Right. And so can I acknowledge that we definitely enabled my sister far too often? Absolutely. But there's such a comfort for me and my dad both, knowing that when she died, there was never a doubt how much we loved her and adored her. Because we were always there when she was ready. You know, when she was ready, we were always there and loved her unconditionally. So I think it's really important. This, like, the codependent word is so shaming and so mean. And, you know, we have family members that are coming in crisis to seek help. And it's like, you know, and it's like this ongoing cycle of shame as family members. We're so focused on these words, but yet we're not focused on the feelings that are associated, the experiences. You know, it's crazy. It's like this is the only disease that, you know, that science, we have all of the evidence to show that this is a disease of the brain, but yet we still have so many medical professionals, so many different researchers that place their opinion over the evidence, you know, and I think that keeps the stigma going as well.
As far as our foundation is concerned, yeah, we need help. We need other people that will be as passionate as we are, which means that they probably would have had a loss at some point. You talk about the 6 degrees of separation. It's hard to find someone today that doesn't know at least of someone that hasn't been affected by this pandemic. So we're going to keep distributing Narcan. And this is just a Band-Aid. Narcan's not the answer. Narcan is hopefully to slow the deaths down, to get some kind of control. But unless we start passing stringent laws, federal and state, and law enforcement behind that, we're going to be in the same situation as the CDC predicts for the next few years.